Hello everyone, and welcome to Wisdom and Wealth. Imagine standing at the twilight of your life, looking back across the years. What story would your path tell? Would you see a tapestry woven with threads of genuine joy, profound purpose, and unwavering, deep connection? Or would your gaze fall upon a landscape marked by years spent relentlessly chasing fleeting shadows, things that ultimately held no real substance? The stark reality is that many among us dedicate our most vital years to the pursuit of status, the accumulation of wealth, and the relentless quest for recognition. Only to awaken, often far too late, to the unsettling truth that we were heading in the completely wrong direction. We often convince ourselves that true happiness, that elusive sense of contentment, lies just beyond the next promotion, the next significant milestone, or the next enticing purchase. But time, like an untamed river, has a way of eroding illusions, of gently but firmly unraveling our carefully constructed fantasies. And one day, seemingly without warning, we wake up to a stark, perhaps unpleasant, new reality. If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more insightful discussions on life, wisdom, and wealth, viewed through the lens of timeless philosophies. We suddenly realize that the things we once deemed absolutely urgent, the relentless climb up the corporate ladder, the constant need to prove ourselves to others, the obsessive amassing of possessions, were, in reality, nothing more than fleeting distractions. The real treasures of life, the things that truly nourish the soul, were always right there, patiently waiting for us to simply open our eyes and notice them. The genuine warmth of a shared laugh with a loved one, the quiet, profound peace of a tranquil morning, the unwavering love of those who walked beside us, supporting us, all along the way. These are the things that matter. But here's the crucial question we must ask ourselves: what if we didn't have to wait until the twilight years of our lives to finally grasp these fundamental truths? What if we could recognize them right here, right now, while we still possess the precious gift of time to change course, to steer our lives toward a more fulfilling horizon? What if we could still make conscious choices that lead to a life filled with true contentment, instead of one shadowed by regret? That's precisely what we're here to explore together. Through the insightful lens of Buddhist philosophy, we will embark on a journey to uncover 9 profound realizations, timeless lessons that, when embraced early and wholeheartedly, possess the power to reshape our lives in the most extraordinary and meaningful ways. Consider this your wake-up call, a gentle but insistent nudge toward a more authentic existence. Because the greatest tragedy in life isn't simply growing old, it's reaching the end of your journey and realizing, with a sinking heart, that you never truly lived at all. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe, as we delve deeper into this enlightening exploration of wisdom and wealth. The illusion of status. For a significant portion of our lives, we find ourselves chasing after titles, relentlessly pursuing promotions, and desperately seeking social recognition. We tell ourselves that achieving a certain level of success will magically bring us fulfillment, that once we reach that elusive position, we will finally be at peace, our anxieties quieted. But the closer we get to the perceived finish line, the further the goalposts seem to move. We spend decades of our lives diligently proving our worth, mistakenly convinced that our very identity is inextricably tied to our position within society. But then, inevitably, something shifts. Retirement, that often dreaded transition, strips away our hard-earned professional identity, and the world, ever-changing, moves on, readily replacing us with younger, often more ambitious, individuals. The accolades that once seemed so monumental, so vital to our sense of self, now gather dust in forgotten corners, serving only as silent reminders of a life that once was. And in this moment of profound quiet, a startling realization dawns upon us: status, that phantom we so desperately chased, was never the true measure of a life well lived. Buddhism, with its ancient wisdom, teaches us that attachment to impermanent things, to fleeting and ultimately meaningless pursuits, inevitably leads to suffering. The relentless pursuit of status is a game that simply cannot be won, because the prize itself is an illusion, a mirage shimmering on the horizon. The real legacy we leave behind, the true measure of our worth, is not found in prestigious titles or impressive accomplishments, but rather in the lives we touch, the genuine kindness we show, and the lasting wisdom we share with others. If you are finding this video insightful, please consider subscribing, so you don't miss the next one. There was once a businessman named Robert who had dedicated his entire life to relentlessly climbing the corporate ladder. He started at the very bottom, worked countless late nights, sacrificed precious holidays, and devoted his every waking moment to securing his place among the elite. By his late 50s, he had undeniably achieved his goal. He was the CEO of a major corporation, a position that commanded respect and, let's be honest, instilled a healthy dose of fear in others. His name carried weight in boardrooms, his presence commanded attention, and his words held the power to shape the future of entire industries. But then, as it always does, the inevitable happened: retirement. The company he had so painstakingly built, the very thing that defined his identity for so long, thanked him for his dedicated service, presented him with a commemorative plaque, a token gesture, perhaps, and swiftly moved forward with his replacement, barely skipping a beat. At first, Robert struggled to adjust to this new reality. He continued to dress in his impeccably tailored suits, almost expecting invitations, important phone calls, and the familiar rush of high-stakes decision-making. But the world, predictably, had already turned its gaze elsewhere. His perceived importance, so deeply intertwined with his job title, evaporated almost overnight, leaving him feeling strangely hollow. It was during this period of confusion and unexpected loss that he stumbled upon a small Buddhist temple nestled near his home. Out of curiosity, or perhaps driven by a sense of quiet desperation, he began attending the morning meditations, seeking solace in the stillness. Day by day, he listened intently to the monks as they spoke of the concept of impermanence, of the importance of letting go of attachments, and of finding meaning that transcended external validation. And then, one ordinary morning, as he swept the temple courtyard alongside an elderly monk, a profound realization struck him with undeniable force. His worth, he realized, had never been in his impressive title. It had never been in the considerable power he wielded. It had always resided in how he treated others, in the simple wisdom he shared, and in those small, often overlooked moments of kindness that had once seemed so insignificant compared to his grand ambitions. One of the monks, sensing his newfound understanding, smiled gently and told him a story. There was once a great scholar who dedicated his life to building an enormous library, believing that the accumulation of knowledge was his lasting legacy. But when he passed away, the books crumbled to dust, and his name was quickly forgotten. The true legacy, the monk explained, is not in what we accumulate, but in what we give away, in the positive impact we have on the world. From that day forward, Robert underwent a remarkable transformation. He stopped introducing himself as the former CEO, and instead became a mentor for young professionals, guiding them not toward the hollow pursuit of status, but toward the discovery of genuine purpose. He began spending quality time with his family in ways he never had before, finally cherishing the simple joy of shared laughter over the empty pursuit of prestige. He realized that status had been nothing more than a tantalizing mirage, luring him relentlessly forward but never offering any real or lasting fulfillment. It was in surrendering to the present moment, in embracing the fleeting nature of recognition, that he finally found a sense of inner peace. True success, it turns out, is not measured by impressive titles or fleeting influence, but by the depth of one's inner contentment. The quiet wisdom found amongst the sweeping leaves in a peaceful monastery may, in the end, hold far more value than the pronouncements of the most powerful executive. The moment we consciously stop chasing the hollow pursuit of status and instead begin nurturing the richness of our souls, we finally step onto the path of true fulfillment. Let's pause and remember to like and subscribe to continue getting these types of teachings. The freedom from others' opinions. How many of your life choices have been dictated by the silent but pervasive fear of judgment? From early childhood, we are conditioned to seek approval from our parents, our teachers, our peers, and society at large. We hesitate before speaking our minds, hold back from pursuing our dreams, and carefully shape our lives around what is deemed acceptable by external forces. But as we approach the age of 70, we often begin to see the inherent absurdity of it all. The opinions that once terrified us, that held such significant power over our decisions, no longer have the same impact. The people we tried so desperately to impress are either preoccupied with their own struggles and insecurities, or they have faded from our lives entirely. And then, with a clarity that can be both liberating and slightly unsettling, it hits us: most people were never truly thinking about us in the first place. They, too, were caught in their own intricate web of worries, self-doubt, and the constant need for external validation. In the Buddhist tradition, the concept of anatta, the profound notion of no fixed self, serves as a powerful reminder that our identity is not defined by external perceptions or the opinions of others. True freedom comes when we consciously stop seeking validation from external sources and start living authentically, in alignment with our own deeply held values. There was once a man named Thomas who had spent his entire life diligently playing the role that others expected of him. As a child, he was the obedient son, excelling in school not because he loved learning, but because it pleased his demanding parents. As a young man, he pursued a career in law, not because it ignited his passion, but because society generally admired and respected it. And as he grew older, he meticulously curated every single aspect of his life: his clothes, his house, his carefully chosen friendships, all in a conscious effort to project a flawless image of success. But something, deep down, never felt quite right. A persistent, nagging feeling that he wasn't living his own life, but someone else's. Then, one day in his late 60s, Thomas reluctantly attended a high school reunion. At first, he was eager to impress his former classmates, effortlessly slipping into his well-rehearsed persona of achievement and success. But as the evening wore on, he began to notice something striking. No one, it seemed, was particularly interested in his carefully constructed success story. Some barely remembered him at all, while others were far too absorbed in sharing their own anxieties about retirement, declining health, and their own unfulfilled dreams to pay much attention to his carefully crafted facade. That night, as he drove home in silence, it hit him like a thunderbolt: he had spent his entire life meticulously shaping himself around the expectations of people who were never truly paying attention in the first place. The years of hesitation, of self-doubt, of constant conforming to external pressures, suddenly felt like a tragic waste of precious time. Not long after that eye-opening reunion, Thomas made a radical decision. He resigned from the numerous board memberships he had never truly enjoyed, sold his ostentatious house, and moved to a small, quiet coastal town. He took up woodworking, a craft he had secretly loved as a child but abandoned long ago, convinced that it wasn't a prestigious or respectable enough pursuit. He spent his days carving intricate figures, not for profit, not for recognition, but simply for the pure joy of creation. One afternoon, a young traveler passing through the town admired his work and tentatively asked if he was a famous sculptor. Thomas simply smiled and replied, "I used to be a lawyer, but that was someone else's dream, not mine. This is who I really am." And for the first time in his life, Thomas felt truly free. True freedom is not found in seeking external approval, but in embracing authenticity, in living in alignment with your own values. Imagine an elderly woman, her hands stained with paint, completely lost in the joy of creation, utterly unconcerned with whether anyone thinks her art is good or not. That is the kind of liberation we should all strive for, the kind that allows us to embrace life fully, without the crushing weight of external expectations pulling us down. Did you know that subscribing is free and only takes a second? If you are enjoying these teachings, consider subscribing and sharing with others. The pointlessness of holding grudges, resentment, in the heat of the moment, often feels perfectly justified. When we are wronged, our anger can become a shield, a way to protect ourselves from further harm and perceived injustice. But what we often fail to see, in our emotional state, is that the grudge does not imprison the other person, it imprisons us. Precious time that could be spent in peace, in joyful pursuits, is instead wasted replaying old wounds, reliving past hurts, and nurturing bitterness. Energy that could be channeled into creation, meaningful connections, and personal growth is instead drained by a corrosive sense of resentment. By the time we reach the age of 70, the weight of accumulated resentment can become undeniable. The people we once held anger toward have often moved on with their lives, changed as individuals, or perhaps even disappeared from our lives entirely. And then we see, with painful clarity, the fundamental truth: holding on to pain only ensures that the past continues to exert a powerful, often destructive, influence on our present. Buddhism teaches that forgiveness is not about excusing bad behavior or condoning harmful actions. It is, first and foremost, about releasing ourselves from the shackles of suffering, freeing ourselves from the corrosive effects of resentment. The Buddha himself once said, "Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned." There was once a man named George, a retired school principal, who carried a heavy burden in his heart for many decades. Years earlier, he had been deeply betrayed by a close friend, a fellow teacher whom he had trusted implicitly. The betrayal was deeply personal, cutting deep into the very fabric of their friendship, and George had vowed, in a moment of intense emotion, never to forgive him. For years, he stubbornly clung to that anger, replaying the painful moment over and over in his mind like an old, worn-out film. Whenever the man's name was mentioned, his stomach would tighten with tension, and bitterness would rise in his throat like bile. Even as he built a successful career, raised a loving family, and gracefully entered his later years, the grudge remained a dark shadow, relentlessly following him through every significant milestone. One day, while sitting alone on his porch, George overheard his grandson playing with his friends. A minor argument had erupted, and in a burst of youthful frustration, his grandson shouted, "I'll never forgive you." Something about those seemingly innocuous words struck George to his very core. He saw his own long-held anger reflected in the child's face, the same rigid refusal to let go, the same heavy weight pressing down on a youthful heart. Later that evening, he sat his grandson down and told him a story about a foolish old man who had spent his entire life carrying a heavy sack filled with stones. Each stone, he explained, represented a past hurt, an injustice, a perceived slight. The man stubbornly refused to set the sack down, convinced that holding onto it would somehow make things right, that it would somehow punish those who had wronged him. But as the years passed, the weight of the sack only grew heavier, and the man's back became bent, his spirit weary and burdened. And then, one day in his final moments, he realized the devastating truth: he had wasted his entire life carrying a burden that he could have set down at any time. His grandson, wide-eyed with understanding, asked what happened to the old man. George smiled sadly and replied, "He realized it too late. But we don't have to make the same mistake." That night, George picked up the phone and dialed a number he had memorized but never dared to use. The voice on the other end was older, softer, unfamiliar, yet deeply familiar at the same time. And in that moment, George did something he never thought he would do: he let go. He forgave. And for the first time in decades, the weight lifted, and he felt lighter, as if he had just set down a sack of stones he had been carrying for far too long. Forgiveness, it turns out, is not primarily for the other person, it is for ourselves. It is the key that unlocks the prison we build with our own hands, the act that frees us from the shackles of the past and allows us to truly live in the present moment. Picture an elderly woman standing at the ocean's edge, watching as the tide carries away a message she had written in the sand, words of anger, resentment, and lingering pain, now washed clean by the relentless waves. That is the transformative power of letting go, that is the liberation of forgiveness. If you would like to see more videos like this, please take a moment to subscribe and like. The emptiness of material possessions. For years, we diligently accumulate bigger houses, more luxurious cars, and the latest gadgets, mistakenly convinced that our success is measured by what we own, by the sheer volume of our possessions. Each new acquisition brings a temporary thrill, a fleeting sense of satisfaction, but soon the desire shifts to something else, fueling an endless cycle of consumption. But as we approach the age of 70, the illusion begins to crumble, and the truth becomes undeniable. The once prized objects lose their initial allure, the grand house feels strangely empty, and the expensive clothes sit untouched in the closet. And what ultimately remains? The cherished experiences, the laughter shared with loved ones, and the positive impact we have had on the lives of others. There was a man named Henry who had dedicated his life to building wealth, to accumulating vast sums of money. As a young man, he had experienced poverty firsthand, and he vowed to himself that he would never again feel the stinging fear of scarcity. He worked tirelessly, making considerable sacrifices, skipping vacations, and postponing simple joys, all in favor of accumulating more. By the time he reached the age of 50, he possessed everything that society deemed impressive: a sprawling mansion, a garage filled with luxury cars, and a bank account that could comfortably sustain him for several lifetimes. And yet, despite all this, an unsettling emptiness gnawed at him from within. One afternoon, Henry paid a visit to an old friend named Samuel, who had consciously chosen a vastly different path in life. Samuel had been a school teacher, never wealthy by conventional standards, but always deeply content. His home was modest, his belongings few, but his life was undeniably rich with genuine friendships, cherished memories, and heartfelt laughter. As they sat together drinking tea, Henry found himself staring intently at a faded, well-worn armchair nestled in the corner of the room. "That chair," Samuel chuckled, noticing Henry's gaze, "has seen more joy than any of your possessions ever will." He continued, "My grandchildren sit there while I tell them stories. My wife used to sit there every evening, knitting and humming old songs. My friends have cried and laughed in that chair. It's just an old piece of furniture, but to me, it holds more value than all the gold in the world." That night, Henry wandered through his grand estate, and for the first time, he truly saw it for what it was: towering walls, pristine furniture, and rooms filled with expensive decor, yet devoid of any real warmth or genuine life. It was a museum of his financial achievements, but it was certainly not a home. Years passed, and as Henry aged, he began to consciously let go of his attachments to material possessions. He sold his mansion and moved into a smaller, more manageable house, one where his children and grandchildren felt comfortable visiting often. He gave away much of his accumulated wealth, using it to fund scholarships, support community projects, and help those in need. And in that act of selfless giving, he found something he had never experienced before: true, unadulterated joy. In Buddhism, the concept of impermanence teaches us that everything is fleeting. Material things may bring temporary pleasure, a fleeting sense of satisfaction, but they will never offer lasting fulfillment or genuine inner peace. What truly remains at the end of life is not what we owned, but how we lived, who we loved, and the kindness we shared with others. Imagine an elderly woman standing in a small, slightly cluttered kitchen, stirring a pot of soup while her grandchildren chatter excitedly around her. She possesses no diamonds, no designer clothes, no flashy possessions, but she is undeniably wealthy in the ways that truly matter: in love, in shared memories, and in the simple, everyday moments that make up a meaningful life. That is the only kind of richness that truly lasts. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you are enjoying this content. The trap of perfectionism. Perfectionism is a seductive illusion, a tantalizing lie we tell ourselves in an attempt to avoid vulnerability and potential failure. We convince ourselves that once the conditions are perfect, we will finally take action, start that business we've always dreamed of, write that book that's been simmering in our minds, or finally tell someone how we truly feel. But as the years relentlessly pass, we realize that perfection never actually arrives. There will always be something not quite right, some perceived flaw that holds us back from taking the leap. Buddhism teaches the inherent beauty of imperfection, the understanding that life was never meant to be flawless, it was meant to be lived, fully and authentically, with all its messy imperfections. The greatest memories, the deepest connections, and the most meaningful experiences all arise from embracing the imperfect moments, from allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and accepting our inherent flaws. Eleanor had spent her entire life waiting for the right moment. As a child, she hesitated before joining games, always afraid that she wouldn't be good enough. As a young woman, she constantly postponed writing her novel, convinced that she needed just a little more knowledge, just a little more time to prepare. She watched countless opportunities slip through her fingers, always believing that she would catch the next one, when she was finally ready. By the time Eleanor reached her 70s, she had a drawer overflowing with unfinished manuscripts, a heart heavy with unspoken words, and a lifetime of potentially beautiful moments she had allowed to pass her by, all in the elusive pursuit of perfection. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching a storm roll in, she thought of an old friend who had always wanted to travel to Italy, to walk through the ancient streets of Rome, to stand in awe beneath the Sistine Chapel. But he had always said, maybe next year, and then, one day, next year, simply never came. That night, something profound shifted within Eleanor. She walked purposefully to her desk, pulled out a half-written story she had abandoned years ago, and began to write, not perfectly, not with any grand expectations, but simply for the pure, unadulterated joy of it. And for the first time in decades, she felt truly alive, connected to something larger than herself. Weeks later, her granddaughter invited her to dance at a family gathering. Normally, Eleanor would have politely waved her off, insisting that she was too old, too stiff, too out of practice to even consider it. But this time, she thought of all the precious time she had wasted waiting for perfection, all the opportunities she had missed by letting fear hold her back. She stood, took her granddaughter's hand, and stepped onto the dance floor. She stumbled, she laughed, and in that moment, she was not merely existing, she was truly living. The truth is that perfection is a mirage, a deceptive illusion that keeps us waiting, hesitating, and watching life unfold from the sidelines instead of actively engaging with it. We convince ourselves that we need more time, more skill, more certainty, but all we ever really need is the courage to begin, to embrace the beautiful messiness of the present moment. In Zen Buddhism, there is a concept called wabi-sabi, the acceptance of transience and imperfection. A cracked teacup, an asymmetrical painting, the tremble in a voice singing a heartfelt song, these things are beautiful not despite their flaws, but because of them. They are beautiful because they are real, because they exist in their imperfect, fleeting nature. Imagine an artist staring blankly at a pristine canvas, brush in hand, too afraid to make the first stroke for fear of ruining it. Now imagine another artist who, with reckless joy and abandon, lets the paint flow freely, embracing each unexpected splash and drip as an integral part of the masterpiece. Who, in the end, has created something of true value? Perfectionism steals our time, our joy, and our chance to fully experience the richness of life. The lesson is clear: stop waiting. Life is happening now, in all its imperfect glory. Don't wait, hit that like and subscribe button now for more teachings. The fleeting nature of time, we always operate under the assumption that there will be more time to chase our dreams, to reconnect with loved ones, to start fresh, to make amends for past mistakes. But by the time we reach the age of 70, we come to the sobering realization that time was never guaranteed. The chances we thought would always be there have vanished, the people we intended to spend more time with are gone, and the opportunities we let slip through our fingers are lost forever. There was a man named Arthur who had spent his entire life believing he had all the time in the world. As a young man, he harbored a secret dream of playing the piano, of composing a song that captured the deep emotions he could never quite put into words. But there was always something else demanding his attention: his demanding job, his numerous responsibilities, the persistent belief that one day, in the distant future, he would finally have the time to dedicate to his music. "I'll start next year," he would tell himself, pushing his dream further and further into the future. But next year inevitably became the year after that, and then another, in an endless cycle of procrastination. Decades passed, and Arthur found himself at the age of 75, staring at an old upright piano in his living room, one that had sat untouched for years, slowly collecting dust. His hands, once strong and steady, now trembled slightly with age, and he sighed, knowing that his fingers were no longer as nimble as they once were. Regret settled into his bones, a heavy weight that seemed to grow heavier with each passing year. The time he had once thought so abundant, so readily available, was now slipping through his grasp like sand through an open palm, irretrievably lost. One evening, his granddaughter came to visit. She had recently taken up the violin and spoke excitedly about the transformative power of music, how it made her feel truly alive, how every note told a story. Arthur listened, a bittersweet smile playing on his lips. She asked him if he had ever played an instrument, and for the first time in years, he admitted his long-forgotten dream. "Then why don't you start now, Grandpa?" she asked, tilting her head in innocent curiosity. Arthur chuckled, shaking his head in gentle resignation. "I'm too old for that now," he said. "My hands aren't what they used to be." But his granddaughter, with all the unwavering conviction and wisdom of youth, simply shrugged and replied, "So? You still have today." That night, long after his granddaughter had left, Arthur sat down at the piano, running his fingers tentatively over the ivory keys. He pressed one down, and a single note echoed through the silent room. Then another, and another, his hands gradually gaining confidence. It was slow, clumsy, and nothing like the beautiful melodies he had once imagined, but it was something. And as he played, he realized that he still had time, at least for this moment, for this simple act of creation. Buddhism teaches us the fundamental concept of impermanence, the understanding that everything, including time, is constantly changing, relentlessly slipping away. We are never promised another day, another chance, another opportunity to pursue our passions. The future is not something we can confidently bank on, it is only the present moment that we truly own. Imagine an old woman sitting by the window, watching the rain fall. She thinks of a letter she always meant to send to an old friend, a reconciliation she never quite made, a trip she always postponed. But time has moved relentlessly forward, indifferent to her regrets. The friend is now gone, the opportune moment has passed, and all that remains is the aching realization that she waited too long. We operate under the illusion that we have plenty of time, but the truth is, we never know how much of it we have left. We tell ourselves that we will call someone tomorrow, that we will visit a place we love someday, but someday is not a guarantee, it is a gamble. And far too often, we realize the urgency of time only when it's far too late to change course. So let's stop waiting. Let's say what we need to say now, let's pursue the passions that set our hearts on fire today, because in the end, the only time we ever truly have is this very moment. Don't wait another moment to subscribe and like for the next life-changing teaching. Health is the real wealth. In our relentless pursuit of ambition, career success, and daily responsibilities, we often neglect our physical and mental well-being, pushing our bodies and minds to their limits. But by the time we reach the age of 70, the consequences of this neglect become undeniably apparent. Strength fades, energy declines, and simple tasks become significant challenges. Richard had dedicated his entire life to building his business, working late nights at the office, attending endless meetings, and grabbing fast food meals on the go, often eating them while simultaneously driving or working. He told himself he was sacrificing for a better future, that he was investing in a life of comfort and security. There was always another deal to close, another milestone to reach, another hurdle to overcome. "I'll start taking care of myself when things finally settle down," he often thought, naively believing that he could put his health on hold. But as so many of us discover, things never truly settle down. Life is a constant stream of challenges, responsibilities, and unforeseen circumstances. At the age of 72, Richard sat in his doctor's office, listening to the words he had both feared and somehow expected. His heart was weak, his blood pressure was dangerously out of control, and the body that had once carried him tirelessly through decades of relentless work was now failing him. And it hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had spent years diligently accumulating wealth, but in the process, he had unknowingly bankrupted his health. "Can I fix this?" he asked, his voice laced with a palpable sense of regret. The doctor sighed, offering a small, sympathetic smile. "You can slow it down," he said gently. "You can make the best of what you have left, but Richard, time is not something we can rewind." That night, Richard sat alone in his grand home, a place he had once dreamed of owning, a symbol of his hard-earned success. But now, the silence was deafening, and the luxury meant little when his legs ached from a simple walk to the kitchen. The fine wine in his cellar held no appeal when his body rejected the slightest indulgence. He realized, with a sinking heart, that all the success, all the accumulated wealth, all the hard-won accolades, none of it could give him back what he had so carelessly lost. Buddhism teaches us the profound principle of mindfulness of the body, the understanding that our physical form is impermanent, fragile, and deserving of our utmost care and respect. The body is not simply a vessel to carry us through our ambitious pursuits, it is a sacred temple that must be honored, nurtured, and protected. Imagine an old woman tending to her garden, her hands gently working the soil, her breath steady and even, her body still strong enough to move with purpose and grace. She has never owned great riches, never built a business empire, but she has diligently nurtured herself, walked every day, eaten nourishing food, and rested when needed. And now, at the age of 80, she moves with ease, savoring the simple joy of bending down to smell a flower, of walking without pain, of being truly alive and fully present in her body. The lesson is clear: health is not something to postpone until a more convenient time. It is not a luxury to be enjoyed only when other priorities have been taken care of. It is, in fact, the very foundation upon which everything else is built. Without it, even the greatest fortune becomes meaningless. Start today. Move your body, nourish it with wholesome foods, honor its limits, and listen to its subtle cues. Because one day, you will wake up and realize that health was the greatest wealth you ever had, and it was in your hands all along. Show your support and hit that like and subscribe button, now. Relationships matter more than achievements. We often make the mistake of assuming that our loved ones will always be there, patiently waiting for us to finally prioritize them. We push off meaningful moments, believing that there will be plenty of time to reconnect, to make amends, to express our affection. But by the time we reach the age of 70, many of those people are gone, and the words left unsaid, the moments left unshared, become painful, haunting regrets. John had always been a man driven by ambition. From a young age, he believed that success was the ultimate measure of a life well lived. He built a highly successful career, working tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder, sacrificing his personal life in the process. The promotions, the accolades, the financial stability, he had seemingly everything he thought he wanted. But in his relentless pursuit of achievement, he had inadvertently sacrificed precious time with those who truly mattered. His wife, Lisa, used to wait up for him, hoping they could share a simple dinner together, but work always came first, and she eventually stopped waiting. His children grew up seeing his absence more than his presence, learning to navigate the complexities of life without their father's consistent guidance. Friends eventually stopped inviting him to gatherings, assuming he was too busy, and he almost always was. There will be time later, he told himself, perpetually postponing connection. Once I reach the next goal, I'll slow down, I'll make it up to them. But time, as we all eventually learn, is not something we can negotiate with or control. One evening, after decades of relentlessly chasing success, John received a phone call that irrevocably changed everything. His best friend, the one he had always meant to catch up with, had passed away unexpectedly. The weight of regret settled in his chest like a heavy stone, crushing his spirit. He scrolled through his phone, realizing with a jolt how many unanswered messages there were, how many missed opportunities to connect, how many moments he had carelessly taken for granted. He went home that night and found Lisa sitting alone in the living room, quietly reading. She looked up and offered a tired but warm smile. He sat down beside her, taking her hand in his, something he hadn't done in years. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. And in that moment, he saw everything with painful clarity. Buddhism teaches us the fundamental impermanence of life, the understanding that everything is constantly changing. The people we love will not be here forever, and the moments we postpone may never come again. True wealth, it turns out, is not found in status or possessions, it is found in the genuine connections we nurture, the unconditional love we share, and the unwavering presence we offer to those who matter most. Imagine an elderly woman sitting at a quiet dinner table, gazing wistfully at an empty chair where her husband once sat. She had spent years believing there would always be more time to say, "I love you," more time to take that long-dreamed-of trip together, more time to simply be present with one another. But time, as it always does, had moved relentlessly forward, indifferent to her carefully laid plans, leaving her with only cherished memories and the constant ache of what could have been. John made a conscious choice to change that night. He started leaving work earlier, took his wife on long, leisurely walks, called his children just to hear their voices, and reconnected with old friends over coffee instead of impersonal emails. He learned, perhaps too late, but not entirely too late, that achievements fade, but love remains. Let this serve as a powerful reminder: the people in our lives are not guarantees, they are precious gifts that must be cherished and appreciated every single day. The love we give today is the only thing that truly lasts. Don't wait until it's too late to cherish what matters most. If this message is one that you find valuable, please take a moment to like and subscribe. True happiness comes from within. After a lifetime spent chasing external sources of joy, seeking fulfillment in money, recognition, and material possessions, we finally come to the profound understanding that happiness was never out there to be found. It was within us all along, waiting to be discovered. Margaret had spent her entire life searching for happiness in all the wrong places. In her youth, she believed it was inextricably tied to achievement, getting the best grades, securing a high-paying job, relentlessly proving herself to others. Later in life, she thought happiness would come from possessions, a dream house,